As countries are starting to loosen quarantine restrictions, the question I've been getting is, why were we so unprepared for this crisis? And will we be better prepared for the crises ahead? I think that we were largely unprepared because of three fundamental human frailties. Firstly, we overvalue the risk of recent events. Secondly, we undervalue the risk of improbable events. And finally, we tend to fight the last war. Now let's break them down. We overvalue the risk of recent events. In 2001, for about 12 months after the tragedies of 9/11, many Americans stopped flying. And this caused a 5% increase in traffic on interstate highways. The result was a massive increase in fatal crashes, which translated into 1,600 additional Americans losing their lives because historically, flying has been safer than driving. Think about that. In the US, every year, approximately 35,000 people die in auto-related crashes. Yet less than 350 Americans died in flight crashes in the last 20 years put together. And that's inclusive of 9/11. But due to the recency of the 9/11 attacks, people avoided flying, which is safer, and deferred to driving, which is far more dangerous. That is the price of our recency bias. And behaviorally, this lack of imagination and concern outside the purview of recent events is what allows most of us to keep our sanity. Because from a risk management point of view, something like a global pandemic that we haven't seen in 100 years, as a result of our recency bias, will leave us unprepared. But besides for overvaluing recent events, we undervalue the risk of improbable events. In the early 1700s, there was a mathematician by the name of Abraham de Moivre, and he developed what we now know as the bell curve. And till this day, economic and financial analysts use the bell curve to paint the normal distribution, plotting all the data along this evenly distributed bell curve. The problem is that when it comes to economic projections, a normal distribution is a complete fallacy. It doesn't exist. There is no way to know exactly where the average is or what a reasonable expectation is. Our models are only as good as human inputs, but humans aren't really wired to calculate probabilities for that which we haven't yet witnessed or experienced. So if a farmer never experienced more than 50 inches of rainfall, it's unlikely he'll be prepared when 500 inches of rainfall appear. Outcomes can be way more extreme than any risk model can predict. The issue is we measure risk in averages, but reality often comes in extremes. And these extremes are what statisticians call tail risks. And when these tail risks show up, they devastate projections, they introduce a great deal of pain, and they make us look unprepared. The third tendency of humans is we tend to fight the last war. There's a common flaw in most military campaigns in that armies employ tactics for the current war from the lessons that they learned fighting the last war. And the problem is the strategies that helped Americans emerge victorious in World War II were not effective in Vietnam. And the strategies they learned in Vietnam have not been effective in the war on terror. As a default, we are generally using outdated tools to solve more advanced contemporary problems. And that is largely because risk management is not about the past, it's about the future. But we have no ability to see the future. Financiers and economists could not envision the Great Depression before it came, nor could they imagine the 2008 crisis or the 2020 COVID crisis before it occurred. That is why every correction makes us look unprepared. It always introduces something that wasn't previously considered. And it is our limitation, or at least a limitation of our human operating system, that we only protect against that which we have seen before, not that which we have yet to see. Truth be told, it's the rational approach, as there are many things that can happen. Way more things than will actually happen. And being cognizant of all the things that can possibly hurt us will not allow us to leave our beds in the morning. So, how do we manage risk? How do we responsibly protect ourselves for the future? The reality is, we are forced to live in an uncertain world. Investors and risk takers get returns in exchange for enduring that uncertainty. And since we cannot conceive all that is possible, we are forced to focus on that which is probable. And what is probable is that at some point, we will be caught off guard. At some point, we will make a mistake or witness something completely unprecedented. Regardless, we will need the time and the liquidity to figure it out. Risk management is not about knowing or predicting the future. It is about accepting the inevitability that the future will bring surprises. And we need to be diversified enough, flexible enough, and level-headed enough to endure it. It's quite ironic that only by recognizing that we are not prepared for everything will we be better equipped for just about anything. I hope and pray that each of you stay healthy, stay safe, and optimistic, as we'll likely have both darker and much brighter days ahead.